Lithuania ranks among the countries with the largest percentage of Jewish victims during the Holocaust. Approximately 227,000 Jews lived within its borders in the beginning of June 1941. About 12,000 of them either escaped to the Soviet Union at the time of the German invasion or were deported by the NKGB to Russia during the last week before the war. Of the 215,000 Jews left in Lithuania, approximately 100,000 lived in the four big cities of Vilna, Kovno, Shavel, and Ponivez, and all the others in hundreds of smaller communities ranging from towns where the Jewish population was several thousand to small villages where only one or two families, Jewish families, lived. Of all those Jewish citizens of Lithuania, only some 8,000 were fortunate to see the end of the Nazi occupation. Moreover, of the 115,000 Jews living in the Lithuanian provincial communities, just a handful survived. Right after the war, various Jewish organizations urged witnesses to testify to Jewish historical commissions, which were established all over liberated Europe. However, there were also private individuals who decided to record testimonies of survivors in projects of their own initiative. The largest project of this type was carried out by late Koniuchovsky, an engineer from the Lithuanian town of Alita, himself a survivor of the Kovno ghetto. Koniuchovsky was concerned that whereas the extermination of the Jews of Vilna and Kovno communities had received considerable attention, the fate of the Jewish communities in rural districts would not be given proper consideration. He recognized the importance of documenting as fast as possible the course of the Holocaust in provincial townships and villages by collecting eyewitness evidence from survivors while their memories were still fresh. Koniuchovsky began interviewing survivors in Lithuania immediately after the war and continued his project over the next 4 years in Poland and Germany. The largest section of his interviews in the German DP camps was done from November 1946 to October 1948 on behalf of the Union of Lithuanian Jews in the American Zone. In this capacity, Koniuchovsky traveled the length and breadth of occupied Germany, recording survivors in the DP camps. Koniuchovsky managed to do over 150 interviews, transcribed by hand in Yiddish and written on about 1,700 folio pages. This rich documentary evidence provides a detailed account of the destruction of 170 provincial Jewish communities in Lithuania. Most of the information in Koniuchovsky's collection of testimonies is about townships or villages in the Lithuanian countryside. The survivors testified on events in communities all over the country, and they were often the only Jews who remained alive to tell the story. Most of the witnesses saw the entire process of extermination firsthand, while others testified on the basis of what they had heard from non-Jews who were first-hand witnesses of the atrocities in townships where the Jewish population had been entirely annihilated. As the testimonies were recorded in the years immediately after the war, the witnesses' recollections were fresh and the events were still vivid in their memory. The survivors remembered the dates and described clearly and in detail what had happened to individuals and families in their communities. They remembered the names of the Jews who had been tormented and killed, and also of the murderers, some of whom they knew well, and others whom they were only acquainted with. The first to extensively use this collection was the late Professor David Bankir, whose research was published in the form of a book, Expulsion and Extermination, by Yad Vashem in the end of 2011. The research used 70 testimonies out of 150 that exist in Koniuchovsky's collection. Those 70 testimonies cover more or less all the country, so they could provide a very good comparative picture of what happened all over Lithuania in every stage of the annihilation process of the Jews. What is the uniqueness of the testimonies collected by Koniuchovsky? Their uniqueness lies in the fact that they allow us to study the Holocaust in Lithuania from the victim's point of view. Whereas the German and Lithuanian documents are written in an impersonal style that cover up the segregation of Jews and the brutality against them before extermination, the testimonies of the survivors describe the same events vividly, focusing on personal accounts. Inclusion of the perspective of the victims redresses the imbalance in the historiography of the Holocaust, which is based almost exclusively on the narrative of the perpetrators. While the perspective of the victims, as it appears in the testimonies, was very limited, since they saw only what was happening in their immediate environment, here precisely lies the value of their accounts, their ability to identify those who humiliated, abused, and tortured them, pillaged their belongings, ejected them from their homes, and in the end massacred their families and people. To our bewilderedness, among those murderers we find medical doctors, employees of the local council before the war, pharmacists, priests, electricians, clerks in the municipality, employees of the courthouse, teachers, students in higher education, and farmers. All of these people were residents of the township who had grown up with the local Jews. Thus, the testimonies in Koniuchovsky's collection do not attempt to present an objective reality. They are rather a representation of the events that the victims experienced or witnessed and what they heard from other victims and eyewitnesses at the time of the occurrences or immediately after the war. Moreover, the testimonies offer interesting insights into the manner in which the Jews perceive their plight. The victims' perspectives reveal a wide range of reactions, from utter disorientation, helplessness, and obedience, to a full awareness of what was about to take place. Another uniqueness of Koniuchovsky's collection of testimonies is that it doesn't only help recreate the events, but also provides a complete picture of the Jewish experience: the humiliation, the stigmatization, the isolation, the slave labor, and the suffering in ghettos before Jews were put to death. This information is completely lacking in the German or Lithuanian versions of the Holocaust in provincial Lithuania. And here we find a striking similarity that the testimonies present, although relate to locations in different parts of the Lithuanian province. According to most testimonies, the Germans joined the Lithuanians in their first days of occupation in robbing and burning down Jewish homes as they swept through the towns. They didn't remain in the towns, however, but kept pushing eastward. Thus, Lithuanians were able to take advantage of the power vacuum that had set in when the Red Army left and the Germans were passing through. According to the testimonies, there can be no doubt that all the initiatives and draconian measures in the victimization against the Jews in those first days were taken independently by the Lithuanians. The Lithuanian nationalists quickly took over the institutions. Their first objective was to set up the civil administration and establish a police force, a town council, and other institutions. The main job of the civil administration was to oversee the lives of the Jews and to pass anti-Jewish decrees. The aim of these decrees was to mark the Jews, distinguish them from the rest of the population, and humiliate them. The decrees included forcing Jews to wear a yellow Star of David, forbidding them from walking in the sidewalks, purchasing in the market, moving freely except at specified hours, and many other abuses. The differences from locality to locality were minor. This civil administration, anti-Jewish sentiments encouraged the Lithuanians to turn against the Jews. The local population could rob them, remove them from their homes, send them to perform degrading forced labor, and torment them in any way they wished. Indeed, the testimonies tell us that the Lithuanians showed a different face to that shown before the war. Lithuanian neighbors, often former friends, had suddenly become enemies who coveted the possessions of the local Jews and showed hatred and an inexplicable need to inflict harm on them. Jewish homes' property were treated as if they had been abandoned, and the neighbors pillaged whatever they could lay their hands on. Moreover, the Lithuanian police or the white partisans would organize street shows in which Jews were forced to undergo a series of indignities, to sing and dance, fall to the ground, and get up repeatedly, all the while being mocked and beaten. The audience was the local populace that looked on with unrestrained glee and raucous applause. It is true that the climate of turmoil and confusion marked the beginning of the German invasion of Lithuania. However, also the process of expulsion to local ghettos and extermination, as described by the eyewitnesses, was very similar everywhere, with only slight differences between the localities. Koniuchovsky's collection uncovers the systematic process of extermination throughout the Lithuanian province and proves that the annihilation of the Jews was conducted in a similar fashion in most provincial towns. The Lithuanians kept the Jews under heavy restrictions, either in ghettos or under arrest for several weeks. Whereas Lithuanian documents provide brief instructions, Koniuchovsky's material gives a richer and more detailed picture of life in the ghettos. Jews were prevented from contact with the outer world, and those attempting to leave the ghetto without permission would be shot without warning. The ghettoized Jews were sent to work, but they were neither paid nor fed for this work, which usually involved building railroads or futile and menial jobs, simply to force the Jews into obedience. When it was time for the execution, the Lithuanians imposed a heavy guard so that no Jews would escape. They brought out wagons for transporting the elderly, the sick, and young children. Other Jews were allowed to bring a small package, or they were told not to bring anything. The Lithuanians marched the Jews to the forests, where large pits, usually one or two, had been dug. Men were shot first, followed by the women, and then the children. Often the children were not shot. They were simply beaten or smashed against hard objects. It's difficult to imagine that such similarities were possible without a directing hand behind the scenes. Hence, it is clear from the testimonies that the Germans had control of the fate of Jews through their influence and behind-the-scenes command. Often only a handful of Germans were present near the pits, but mostly they didn't take an active part in the shootings. Witnesses, both Jews and non-Jews, noted that while the Lithuanians did the shooting, the Germans observed from the sidelines, filming and taking photographs. Moreover, the shooting by the Lithuanians was not only a technical procedure of fulfilling orders, but was accompanied with over-enthusiasm and inhuman hatred towards the Jews. After the killing was completed, the Lithuanians walked away, singing patriotic songs and drinking heavily. The Germans joined them later at drinking parties. A scrutiny of Koniuchovsky's collection enables to identify important subjects that were almost totally ignored in the existing few researches about provincial Lithuania. For example, the testimonies provide a vivid picture of Jewish life in the interwar period in the provincial townships. The survivors portray the vibrant domestic life of Jewish communities, separated from the Lithuanians by deep cultural differences as well as language, religion, and economy. There were Hebrew and Yiddish schools, libraries with Hebrew and Yiddish books, synagogues, active youth movements, political societies, sports leagues, and other organizations and institutions. These interesting descriptions can be found in the beginning of every testimony of the collection. Here, for example, we see in the beginning is a description of the life before the war, of course in Yiddish. Although I didn't have the opportunity to search these specific descriptions, I used the testimonies thoroughly in order to find answers to some interesting research questions, such as the question, is it possible that there was no Jewish resistance to the Lithuanian acts of humiliation, robbery, and extermination? Jewish resistance, in contrast to conventional armed opposition, is an aspect that is absent in the perpetrator sources. Koniuchovsky's evidence proves how under conditions of the most incredible deprivation, Jews mobilized their emotional as well as material resources. It is known that some did sink under the weight of oppression and deprivation, become demoralized, and lose all sense of hope. Others, though, responded by asserting their individuality and sometimes their collective identities. I could find in the testimonies that there were cases of opposition to the perpetrators in situations where resistance was almost impossible, when Jews were systematically starved and brutalized, when they were uprooted, moved from place to place, ghettoized and deported, when they didn't have time to assemble the means by which to fight, and under conditions of isolation where there were no weapons at all. Other interesting questions that I dealt with while mining Koniuchovsky's collection were the attitude of the Lithuanian activists to local rabbis, which was a very harsh and brutal just in order to humiliate a Jewish symbol, or the approach of local or regional priests to rescue issues, which ranged from help to Jews to leading of gangs of local murderers against the Jews. Thus, Koniuchovsky's collection can serve as a rich source for studying various uncovered aspects of the annihilation process of the Jews in provincial Lithuania. For those not acquainted with Koniuchovsky's collection, the collection of testimonies is located now in Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. And here we can see an example of a testimony from the township of Uzhvent in Lithuania. Koniuchovsky was concerned about the historical precision. And here he read each testimony aloud as it was taken to ensure its accuracy. After testifying, the interviewee was asked to read and sign every page of his or her declaration, and both the testimony and the signature were certified by the representatives of the DP camp administration. Furthermore, Koniuchovsky cross-checked the facts, names, and dates given by one witness about a particular community with other testimonies from the same place. In our example, you can see here at the bottom the certification of the DP camp administration of Feldafing, Bayern. And here again, at the bottom, we can see both the signatures and the certification. Thank you.